What does brewing beer look like? Which elements are involved in the brewing process? The process of making beer is called the brewing process. Beer is being brewed with 4 ingredients: hop, malt, yeast, and water. The grain that comes from the fields is polluted with pieces of stalk, chaff, weed seeds, and other pieces of organic material, and is therefore cleaned first. This is done by washing the grain in water. The most popular sort of grain for beer is barley. This barley needs to undergo the process of malting before it can be used for making beer. In the malt houses, barley is turned into malt. Malting is the term for processing grains into dried barley sprouts. The barley is soaked in water and left alone over the course of a few days in a germinating box. In the warm germinating box, the barley grains develop a small root. This process is called to germinate. During germination, enzymes are developed that turn the starch in the grains into sugar. These sugars are very important for the brewer to make alcohol and CO2 at a later stage. In order for the sugars not to be lost, the malt is then dried, which puts a halt to germination. This is called kilning. The drying of the malt results in a mixture, which is called Pilsner malt. This Pilsner malt can then further be heated by way of roasting. This will cause the malt to change color and taste. If the malt is heated at even higher temperatures, the sugars melt, which results into a substance called caramalt. At very high temperatures, the malt will turn very dark. This dark malt is called choco malt, and it is used to add color, aroma, and flavor to the beer. Another possibility is the smoking of the malt. This method is used in order to give the beer a specifically smoky taste that is similar to smoked ham or smoked eel. Only in Bamberg in Germany, brewers still apply the craft of smoking malt. The first thing the brewer does after the malt has arrived at the brewery is to crush the dried grains. This will turn the malt into grist. The malt grain is fairly solid, and by breaking the kernel, it is easier for the starch to dissolve into the brew water later on. Grinding separates the kernels from the husk, but the brewer will not get rid of the chaff just yet. Chaff has the important role of filter at a later stage in the brewing process. During mashing, the malt is dissolved in water. The mixture is gradually heated in order for the sugars to come loose from the malt. At a temperature of 65 degrees Celsius, a lot of fermentable sugars are being released. Mashing can also be done at higher temperatures, which sets free sugars that cannot be fermented. These sugars, however, are useful for seasoning because they will give the beer a full and sweet taste. The blend that results from mashing is a combination of a rich, sugary liquid and the residual grain. The hard grain particles are not needed any longer and must therefore be separated from the fluid. This is done by filtering or lautering. The residue that is filtered out is called brewer's grain, and it is an excellent fodder for livestock. The filtered, sugary fluid is called wort. After lautering, the wort is boiled in a kettle known as the copper. During boiling, hop is slowly added. Hop gives beer its bitter taste. It takes care of a firm foam layer, and it is a preservative. Because of the boiling, the water evaporates and the concentration of sugar in the liquid increases. The beer gets fuller and heavier. Depending on the temperature and boiling time, different types of beer are brewed. After boiling, the wort gets filtered and is then quickly cooled off so that bacteria will not get a chance to infect the beer. A brewer can also apply the process of dry hopping. This is done by adding the hop to the wort after it has been boiled. This process allows the flavor and aroma of the hop to stay intact instead of being destroyed by boiling. The hop aroma in such beers is much higher. IPA beers, for example, are brewed using the process of dry hopping. The cooled down wort is transported to the fermenter. The yeast cells transform the sugar that developed during mashing into carbonic acid gas, CO2, alcohol, and aromas. The sugar content of the wort eventually determines the alcohol content of the beer. The first beer can also be called young beer. Young beer is stored in closed-off containers and left alone at low temperatures. This is called lagering. Out of these closed containers, the carbonic acid is not allowed to escape, which causes the beer to stay tingly and fizzy. The period of lagering can run between a week and a few months, depending on the type of beer that is being brewed. Lagering, therefore, can also be called ripening. Many beers are filtered before they are bottled. This will result in a totally clear type of beer. During filtering, yeast is removed and what is left is a transparent beer. Many Weizen and white beers are left unfiltered, which causes the typical opaque nature of these beers. Pils, on the other hand, is almost always filtered. Filtering also influences taste. Filtered beers have a very constant flavor, whereas unfiltered beers vary in taste. The beer is now packaged in bottles, cans, kegs, or bulk tanks. Packaging makes sure that the beer is well protected against light and oxygen. Depending on the type of beer, some bottles, cans, and kegs are pasteurized in order to prolong the best before date and to deactivate yeast cells that might still be floating around in the beer. Some types of beer of high fermentation are post-fermented in the bottle. This means that after putting the beer in the bottle, a little bit of extra sugar and yeast is added to the beer before the bottle is closed off. This will allow the fermentation process to continue within the bottle. It results in the beer to have a higher alcohol content as well as a different taste. So, this is how beer is brewed. You're just one chapter away from earning the first certificate. But for now, cheers!